In Bach's music, dotted notes often have multiple meanings, complicating both readability and performance. A close calligraphic reading offers a way to clarify these ambiguities. In the opening section of his solo violin music, most dots correspond to modern notation rules. The duration is extended by half the value of the note. An exception is visible here. The note is not extended by the usual half, but by only a quarter of its value to complete the beat. This is not a typographical mistake, but a Baroque convention. The dot simply represents whatever duration is needed within that specific context. That said, real typos can be found in the autograph. In the same bar, the last beat is a 30-second note short. Modern Urtext editions correct the actual error, but keep the ambiguous dot as it is to stay true to the original Baroque notation. This leaves it up to the performer to recognize these patterns and solve the rhythmic riddle on the fly. While modern editions strive for fidelity to the source, they frequently introduce editorial changes, modernizing the score for the sake of readability. Accidentals follow modern conventions. Compound slurs have been simplified to a single continuous line. Stem directions too are modified to align with modern standards. Most drastic, the rich, expressive differentiation in Bach's original beaming is reduced to a stiff, rectilinear uniformity. Musical meaning is muted by these interventions. The interplay of stems and slurs combined with the flow of Bach's beaming creates natural phrase groupings. This inherent visual energy or infectious dynamics directly invites specific articulations. The autograph inspires artistic performance. Modernization breaks this connection. The vertical arrangement of notes creates a certain woodenness that causes the musical flow to fall apart even further. There is a striking paradox here. The expressive guidance of the autograph is lost, but the metrical reading difficulties of dotted notes remain. Should we settle for that? Metrically correct notation of complex dotted notes is no dubious device by definition. The difficult unit from the Adagio also appears in Bach's brightly beamed Goldberg engraving. However, here Bach replaces the complex dot with two tight notes, explicitly defining the duration and removing any need for guesswork. In the Sei Solo autograph, we are not dealing with a lack of notation precision, but with a handwritten score that makes systematic use of shorthand solutions for dotted notation. In the introductory Adagio, we encounter dotted notes primarily when only a single voice is sounding. By examining the diverse textual configurations across the Sei Solo cycle, we can establish a contrapuntal hierarchy and effectively compile a dot catalogue of different manifestations and meanings. In the opening of the Allemanda from the first partita, Bach uses a 4-part dotted texture on strong beats. The dotted rhythm was institutionalized by the French composer Lully. It was intended to give the Sun King the opportunity to make his entrance with a majestic gait. Layered instrumental polyphony has its cradle in the cracked contours of steel brisé, a centuries-old tradition in which lutenists adapted vocal music for their instrument. Their goal was to suggest melody progression and polyphony rather than performing every note literally. It became a dominant style on keyboard instruments. Bach was alerted to its potential application on the violin to to the works of Paul von Westhoff, a fellow violinist he likely met in person. In the Allemanda, a vertical uniformity of dotted notes is the defining characteristic. There are 3 places in the autograph where this differs, and in the latest Urtext edition we see that dots are supplemented to bass, tenor and alto in this bar. This trinity of instances serves as a foreshadowing of the shifting priorities we will encounter in the grave of the succeeding sonata. We also find passages where a dot takes on the extra value of an eighth or a quarter of the note length. At first glance, these anomalies are difficult to identify, as they defy our modern rhythmic intuition. Even with repeated performance, they never become visually intuitive. They must be consciously memorized and mentally maintained against the grain of the written score. In this piece, the modern NBA Urtext edition has a dot typo. The soprano dot exceeds the required duration of the beat. We can again observe that the shorthand notation of these dotted notes is respected in modern editions. If we compare this with Bach's own publications in print, for example here in his Klavierübung 3, where he is metrically precise using tight notes, we might wonder whether adapting the Sei Solo to tight notes for the difficult-to-read, non-standard dotted notes wouldn't be much more appropriate. In the Sarabande from the first partita, we encounter another intriguing priority. Traditionally, a Sarabande places its emphasis on the second beat of the measure. However, Bach defies this expectation by placing the dotted notes firmly on the first beat. This shift in weight transforms the character of the dance, demanding a different kind of rhythmic poise from the performer. In the grave of the second sonata, the dotted notes systematically highlight the upper voice, emphasizing the aria-like essence of the movement. Here the priority is melodic. The dots serve to project a singing line over the underlying texture. In contrast to the Allemanda, the lower voices are often sounding a fraction shorter, allowing the soprano to resonate with greater autonomy. In the opening section of the Ciaccona, dotted notes highlight specific voices. Initially appearing in the upper voice, this emphasis later shifts to the middle. Bach highlights the vertical inequality of the duration by explicitly writing out rests. This makes the shifting polyphonic weight within the texture unmistakably clear. The bow trajectory of the broken style, guided by the dot catalogue, reaches a peak in the Ciaccona. It has evolved from single voice in the Adagio to rhythmic unity in the Allemanda, upper voice highlighting in the grave, and complex shifting polyphony in the Ciaccona itself. In performance practice, this differentiation of dotted notes is often articulated through dynamics and accents rather than duration. While this creates a sense of rhythmic energy, it misses the point of Bach's notation. By substituting loudness for length, the polyphonic logic is obscured, the layered transparency of the voices is lessened, reducing a complex polyphonic structure to a series of dynamic shifts. To recover this transparency, an awareness of Bach's specific notation is essential. Using a Baroque bow is particularly effective here, as its natural response allows for the subtle differentiation in duration that the music demands. In the penultimate measure of the Ciaccona, we find a rare phenomenon, a dot placed after the bar line. This creates a suspenseful continuation of resonance that undermines the hierarchy of the pulse. The dot becomes the spotlight, illuminating the soprano's sovereignty. If you consider the Ciaccona as a tombeau for Bach's recently deceased wife, Maria Barbara, then this dramatic breathing sign has even more impact. Modern editors choose not to adopt this calligraphic peculiarity. Their decision brings us back to the fundamental question of when intervention is truly desirable and when it simply erases the composer's intent. In the Loure from the final partita, we encounter a different debate within the historically informed performance movement. There is a frequent tendency to shorten the duration of the dotted notes, prioritizing a lighter and more detached articulation. This fits a certain Baroque aesthetic, prompting us to weigh the lilt of the dance against the specific melodic breadth that Bach's notation seems to imply. To illustrate this, we can compare two contrasting approaches to the Loure. Isaac Perlman's performance represents the modern Romantic tradition. He follows the notation with metrical exactness, creating a rich, swaying pulse for his singing melody. Contrast, Rachel Potcher uses a Baroque bow to achieve a lighter, more detached feeling by shortening the dotted notes. Her approach prioritizes the lulling lilt of the dance, rooted in the lineage of historical knowledge that has persisted despite the aesthetic shifts of the 19th century. This shows that the understanding of the Loure's rhythmic character survived as a parallel tradition, even when the dominant Romantic style favored a more literal interpretation of the score. A close look at the calligraphy is essential, but it's only part of the story. Our interpretation of these dots is influenced by our knowledge of historical performance practice. Couperin permitted this pliant practice, notation as a penned approximation of taste. Quantz decreed a dynamic sharpness. The dot must defer to the dramatic effect. Their guidance is a ghostly grit, precise in principle, yet provocatively porous for the modern performer. It is within this friction between written ink and historical context that a fertile field of inquiry opens up to explore the possibilities of Bach's notation. Bach often marked the center of a collection with the dotted rhythm of a French-style overture, a fresh start halfway. We see this, for example, in the Goldberg Variations or the Well-Tempered Clavier. In this variation, Bach chose the optical simplicity of shorthand dotted notes in print, which in its first occurrence is aided by the vertical alignment of a counter melody. Peter Kellner's copy preserves an early compositional draft of the Sei Solo. Its different sequence of movements reveals that this Adagio, with its French overture character, though now the opening of the final sonata, was originally intended as the collection's centerpiece. In this movement, the migration of dots between voices, a phenomenon already observed in the Ciaccona, is expressed with an even greater structured emphasis. The dotted notes shift and shimmer within the voice leading, acting as a kind of dialogue. The rhythm migrates, while one voice sustains the dot, the others articulate the underlying pulse, creating a perpetual call and response between the layers. This shifting dialogue requires the performer not only to manage the rhythmic duration, but to constantly redirect the listener's attention to the voice that carries the dot at that specific moment. The length and the position of the dot serve as tools for polyphonic illumination. By looking past the standardized rules of modern editions and returning to Bach's own hand, we discover a world of expressive freedom. These dots are not just rhythmic markers, they are invitations to understand the breath, the dance, and the polyphonic life within the music. The calligraphy shows us how to read, how to play, and ultimately how to listen.